Have you ever wondered what it would be like to reach out and touch a wild horse, make human contact with it for the very first time? It takes a special skill to train any horse, let alone a wild one, and even more when they are huge fifth generation 8-year-old stallions that have never had any human contact before. In this week's podcast, we're going to hear firsthand from Mark just how he did that time and time again, as he tells us all about his vast experience befriending the Brumbies. Hello, welcome to Mark Langley's Horsemanship Podcast, a podcast helping people to understand their horses better to provide positive training solutions for a happier horse world for all. I'm Jenny Langley.
And I'm Mark Langley.
Mark, what does your average Australian Brumbie look like?
It's a range actually. There's so many different sort of areas in Australia where there's Brumbies and like I've done Brumbies that have been from Coffin Bay, which I think originate in South Australia, and then Guy Fawkes Brumbies, which is in a sort of, we've done a lot of pack horsing through there, and the Guy Fawkes is like a river valley, which has a lot of Brumbies in it, and there's also Brumbies. I've done the Kosciuszko Brumbies that I guess are quite famous, from the old poem, "The Man from Snowy River," and the horses up in the high country, and then Brumbies from up in the Northern Territory, which are more desert style Brumbies. They were Northern Territory, or on the border of Western Australia, and they were big desert Brumbies. And I find the ones from the desert tend to be a lot bigger horses. They're not as small, whereas I've noticed the ones that come out of Kosciuszko and the Coffin Bay ones I did were only little stunted sort of Brumbies, very small. But yeah, they're like when we used to go through the Guy Fawkes, there was at one stage there was a different mob on every corner, and there was big buckskin stallions, and then around the corner there was like herds of paints and things like that. And I think back in the day, they used to let like a golden slipper horse go with that. There was all the old stories of like a famous winning racehorse stud they'd let go into the herd of wild horses to. So when the old timers used to catch the wild horses for work horses, they'd have some good genetics, keep fresh genetics going through there. And really the Brumbies originated. They're all I guess horses that have slowly gone feral over the years. So you get all the work bloodlines and like the ones that I did from up north. Some of those were feathery and they had looked like they had a lot of Percheron in them. Some of those ones. So. And it just comes from all the old work breeds that were, brought over and then bred in Australia for the Australian conditions.
So do they have different personality types then to your sort of standard horse that might come through that's just been bred on a property?
When I was starting horses in Glen Innes, like I could get a hand on a Brumbie sometimes and get riding quite quick, and then I could get a hand on a sort of an unhandled bred horse, quite quick, and then others I could hardly get a hand on, and it didn't matter if it was a bred horse or a wild horse or a Brumbie. I think it was just how sensitive they were. But I guess if we were comparing handled horses versus Brumbies, I don't really think the Brumbies are much different than the good genetic workhorses that people breed. There's a lot of good temperaments amongst them, and I think there's a lot of similarities between them because the genetics go back to the horses that were bred horses anyway. So it's not like some breeder horse that's been around for 1,000 years right back that hasn't been, the genetics haven't been touched. So to me, they've just if you get older horses, they're just more very herd bound. They've grown up in a herd. They've survived in that wild herd life, so yeah, that's quite strong in their temperament. But in the sense of training, taking on information, and trust building and stuff like that, I really found not a lot of difference.
Can you tell me if there's a significant stage in their training, something that might happen that you think is quite a crucial element? Maybe it might be when you first put a hand on them or the first time you ride them.
I think the most exciting thing and crucial bit was that first, when they allow you to sort of, when they accept you and they make contact with you and you make contact with them and they start to trust you. I always found that very exciting, because every time you got a horse that it's never been handled, and you were the first contact that they made with a person, and I thought that first contact was very important, and how you sort of did it, because that first sniff and that reach out from them, just like a young foal, when people get excited, the young foal comes over and sniffs them. If that horse reaches out to you a bit and trusts you, and then starts to allow you into their space, and then they become curious with you, I find that's crucial, because it just helps the whole process. But if you've sort of skull dragged them around on the end of a rope and sort of got them sort of frozen, then basically that's their handling right from the start, and it sets them up to be difficult for a long time, because that's their memory of people. It's and they've gone into that sort of learned helplessness state, because they couldn't do anything else. So to me, it was crucial that they made a connection and trusted me, because then when I was getting up on them, I was getting up on a horse that somewhat trusted me. And as you know, there's so many processes all the way through that was important, but I felt that first connection, that first trust that they had with us was really good.
You mentioned before that they have quite a strong connection to their herd. They're growing up in the wilderness in these herds. Does that change how you train them? Did you have to sort of accommodate, is there a difference in how you would train a Brumbie because of that?
I think like that, people ride their horses and they talk about separation anxiety. And I say to people, anxiety's, anxiety is what's causing more of the horse to feel stressed when it's separated from its friends. And then the other part of it is the connection disability. And I guess I'd talk about connection ability or disability. Is so when a Brumbie and a wild horse feels safe around us, the ability to move away from its friends is a lot better. But you've got to remember that they've grown up in a herd. Their whole stability, their whole life has been a herd. And some of the Brumbies I've done, they were captured when they were older, which means they've been with a herd up until at least 60 years old, and those ones have a very strong herd connection. So I think they really know. There was a mob that I did, and they really were. They knew when another Brumbie called out versus another horse that called out. That's what some people that rode them said. But basically, they do have a strong connection to the herd, which means you have that magnetism that you have to deal with. And there was one Brumbie that I remember starting years ago. It was and I can't even remember when this one was captured, but it had the quietest, strongest magnetism that was always there. It no matter, and you could wire it out for miles, but it was always drifting off through its left eye, and eventually that left eye would bring it all the way back around in a circle back to where home was. And everyone has that sort of herd safety, safety at home or whatever, but it always knew where the herd it left was. But I think that's in a lot of horses that are grown up with herds and things like that. It's just that when you capture Brumbies over 60 or so years old, they've been living that life for a long time, and that's the only life they've known. So but in saying that too, they can also be wary of other herds. So it's not necessarily so it's not like every time they see a horse they're drawn to other horses and they have to go with other horses. If there was another herd of horses, sometimes they're like, well, no, that's not really a herd of mine. Because out in the wild, there's obviously there's herds everywhere, and as people have seen, even with their own herds, if a new horse wants to come into that herd, it's not that easy. So if they've established a new herd back at your place with the horses that they know, it doesn't mean they're just going to connect with any random sort of horses that they see. So they can be actually quite good when you've got a good connection, because sometimes they're not as needy as some of the horses that haven't had a good established herd life as they're growing up, because the needy horses are almost like kids that are growing up on the street not knowing who their mentors are or anything, and or just growing up in an environment with no mentors, no anything, or no boundaries. So horses that grow up in the wild, they grow up with clear boundaries. They grow up learning to adjust around conflict and all that sort of thing. They're sort of resilient. They're self-reliant. they think through situations. So a lot of the Brumbies that, that herd environment that they've grown up in has given them a strength, because it's been a wild herd environment, and herd environments, as the conflict that's internal in those environments, and it makes them quite stable-minded horses.
Mark, take me back 16 years ago. You were contacted to train a mob of quite special Brumbies. Can you tell me about them? Yeah,
they were the mob of Brumbies from up north, and on the Western Australian Northern Territory border. There was and why they were interested in selecting these horses is through a dry time there's no water sources up there except for this one water source, which was quite a large one. So they were estimating that they were sort of walking, 2 days between water, out and back, to forage and then come back to water, and so they worked out that these desert Brumbies, they cover a lot of country. Some of those desert Brumbies, there was old remount studs and all the station horses that were bred over the years and everything, and so the big horses, the genetics look good in the sense of strength and durability. So basically, they hand selected one out of 50 or one out of 100 to trial as an endurance horse, and so they'd hand select them, and then they'd work out their age. And I think if they were over 8, they sort of said, oh, well, maybe we won't take them over 8. But the main ones I did were, averaging about that 6-year-old. They were big, strong horses. They weren't just your little Kosciuszko Brumbies, and they all had age on them. And but nice mob to work, yeah.
So big and strong. How high are we talking?
Well, they were sort of ranging between that upwards of 15, but they'd be sort of 15.2 to 16.1.
16
was a couple
hand,
of little ones
6-year-old.
Yeah, there was a little filly in there, which was only little, but but they're all that sort of definitely sort of somewhere just under the 16 or 15.2 mark, yeah.
Very big, very strong, and some of them were stallions.
They'd all, most of them actually were they were gelded, so they were gelded, and then they came down only just freshly gelded. Actually, they were only just still healing up, and just at the they had to travel, and then they got stuck with equine influenza and all sorts of things. It was but yeah, it's a big mission getting them to where I was to start them, and then they got stopped about sort of 20 k's from home when equine influenza shut everything down, so I had to travel to go and start them at someone else's place.
And why were you picked?
Well, I was dealing with those particular people and their endurance horses, and they liked what I did with all their, and the horses that they used to breed, they would have had a little bit of handling when they were young, but they were all tipped out in big paddocks, in big mobs, because they had them adjusted all over the place. And I guess I was picked because I was starting their horses at the time, and they were happy with what I was producing, and their horses were pretty touchy horses. So so they thought, oh, well, we'll see how Mark goes with these horses.
So you had this mob, what was it, 5, 6 Brumbies that you were given?
I had a group of 5 that I started, and there was another 5 that was going to be started by somebody else, and then I think one ended up getting started elsewhere just because I could take 5 at the time.
Okay, you had these 5 Brumbies, and how long were you given to train them?
Yeah, it was sort of a 3-week or 15 lesson start.
3-week start.
Yeah.
From absolute, so they'd been obviously darted, put on a truck, gelded, but all of that under sedation. So literally landed on your property.
So they'd just been sort of really yarded and loaded on trucks, and they caught them in a different way. Instead of sort of big musters and running them into yards and stuff and drafting them off, they actually darted them, like as you said. They darted them because one of the fellows involved with it, he was a vet, so they just dart the ones that they wanted, and then they just slip them on a flatbed trailer, and then they'd wake up with the other mob of horses in a yard, and then so they were all cut and everything, and ready to be started. So, and 3 weeks is not a lot of time, but by that time I'd done a lot of horses in that time period that were jumped off trucks and never handled, so I was sort of familiar with the process of going from start to close to finish,
Tell me about some of the horses. There were different types there.
Yeah, there were different types. Like one little filly, I reckon I could have just about sat on her on the first lesson. You know, she was pretty quiet. And then the other bit older ones, but mind you, she was the youngest of the lot. She was the 3-year-old, and as I say, the rest was sort of around that 6. One was 5, one other mare was 5, and so basically they were all pretty good horses. They're all very good horses actually, and one of them was Luca. He was a really tough one. He was tough in the sense of very, very nervous horse, really nervous, and I actually felt down his neck, and he had all these little divots in his neck, and I don't know, he didn't have the same confidence as the others. The others were nervous, as in wild horses would be, but they had a certain confidence that started to show as we worked through it. But Luca was the real sensitive one, and he, I had my ideas on it, whether he was pushed out and had more fights and was a bit of a solitaire, you know, or you know, whether he had his own mares or not, or he got in a lot of fights. But yeah, because you could feel it on his neck, the different scars and different things. But anyway, he was a really nervous horse, and he was a tough one. So I actually didn't get him done. I got a ride on him in the first 15 lessons, but he was one that I had to finish off when equine influenza opened up and they were ready to shift him somewhere else. So but the other 4 I got all started and riding and stuff like that, and they went pretty good. And the mare, she was the thoroughbred type of mare, the chestnut mare, just looked like a horse that you get off the track. You know, she was this chestnut mare, and they say Brumbies have got amazing feet. Well, she just had kind of thoroughbredy sort of feet, and enough that she survived in the desert and got to her age okay, but not that she had smashing great feet. But and then there was another one. He was a big steely grey fella, and I think we called him Steely. He was a nervous horse. He would really not let me down one side, and finally got on him, and he was okay. Like, he didn't have any problems under saddle, you know, in the sense that there was nothing out of the ordinary. The mare was a bit bronky when I got first cantering out the paddock and stuff like that. She'd sort of hump a bit at the canter, and close to the gallop she'd start bronking along a bit. But I'm just trying to think of the other 2. There was another quiet one I did. I don't remember him as much because he's the one that got a little bit of handling, because there's a saddler who was sister of one of the ladies who I used to deal with the endurance horses with, who was the partner of the vet, and her brother went up and he did a bit of handling on this grey one, so he had a bit of holder breaking and stuff before he came down, so he was already a bit quiet, so he was one I could sort of get going and, you know, get on reasonably quick and get going with. But yeah, the other 4 was certainly sensitive, but Luca, you know, getting a hand on him and trying to get him to trust took a fair bit. And
do you ever get nervous riding horses like this for the sort of...
Yeah, I must admit, when I've never been I'm not Australia's greatest saddle bronc rider or anything, and so when I sort of had my wits about me, and I'd sent her up, I could, you know, ride a fair horse, but I never was the most rough and tumble confident rider, and most of the time when I was getting on horses, I was getting on my own all the time. So there's that element of, you know, what's going to happen. You know, this horse could crash into a fence or crash over a fence if it all goes wrong, and I hope in the short amount of time I've got enough trust, because you're not got them to the stage that they're gooey. They're still a bit nervous, and you still get on a nervous, touchy horse, but you've done the best you can to get as much trust you can that everything's going to be okay. And I remember when the fellow who was doing another few of them, he was a bit more sort of a chatty, noisy sort of fella, and you know, and I finally thought, I think I might get on Luca today, and anyway, I'm just sort of stepping up on him and getting off, and he comes, you know, blundering down the round, you know, "Hey Mark, how you going? What are you up to?" And I'm like, and then you could feel Luca just grow about, you know, it felt like he grew a foot, and his eyes just went, okay, the energy's changed now. And I thought, and then all of a sudden that stupid ego thing steps in, and because there's someone else there watching you, and they've been, you know, you feel like you've been putting it off, and I did the silly thing of getting on him, and they were big, and they were in desert condition. They're big, strong horses. They're off, you know, they do well in the desert when the desert country's good. So they were sort of mud fat, and anyway, so I got on him, and and sure enough, he did go to town, and he bronked, and I remember the fellow there. He goes, "Mark, I think your saddle's slipping back. And I said, yeah, I think it is too, because the horse's neck was getting longer and the wither was getting further back. And sure enough, the saddle was getting into no man's land. And so once the girth getting the saddle gets back over there, you're in a pretty vulnerable position. But anyway, right at the moment, I was in no man's land with the saddle. He stopped, and he stopped bucking, and I went, right, okay, I'll just get off him now, because I had to fix the saddle. I couldn't stay on him and go, well, maybe I'll put a turn on him, because it was just like if anything else happened, the saddle would have went back over, like slipped right back over his hip, and then so I got off him and sorted things out, and that was it, because I was getting close to the end of the day, and I thought, well, I'll just step up in the stirrup and step down, and I'll leave him there.
And then after that, something happened to you that delayed the process, something that changed your life completely. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, well, we went away on a fencing job just to sort of, it was before Christmas time, so I finished these horses getting close to Christmas, and just to sort of, we used to do a bit of contract fencing on the side, take a few contracts on, and we went away to do a fencing job, and in the process of preparing for it, it was flooding where we were, and I got bitten by a snake, which was a type of tiger snake, and it bit me 3 times on the foot, and then I spent, I think, a month in hospital after that, because the venom went straight into my vein, and so it didn't go through the lymph system, and so I ended up with all the things that the tiger, so it was I called a rough scale snake, which is a coastal type of tiger, which looks a bit like a tree snake. So people have died by catching them thinking they're a tree snake, and taking them to show their mates, and then getting taken to hospital but not quite making it, because they realise that they're a tiger snake. And
so a highly venomous, lethal snake.
Highly venomous snake. So if people overseas aren't aware, there's a few types of snakes in Australia, but the tiger snake, it does the muscle breakdown, so it'll thin your blood right out. It'll cause your the muscles to break down,
and it affects your nerves as well.
Yeah, your nerves and paralysis. Yeah, so
so you nearly died.
Well, I don't know. I never thought I was going that way, but some people might have thought differently. But I always thought it's just a snake bite, I'll be all right. But once the antivenin wasn't working, I realised it was a bit more sinister, because it was already latched into my system. So the antivenin didn't do a lot. So
what did it do to you?
So the first thing was the thinning of the blood. Yeah, I when I went into hospital, and it was funny, because we went into the hospital in the ambulance, and there was like this. It was like peak hour traffic at the hospital, like, and it was a coastal hospital which is the Gold Coast, which is like a mini version for the American people, like Miami, and it was apparently there's a big rave party on the Gold Coast, and there was just lines of stretchers on the way in. I thought, I'm just going to have to go in the line, I suppose, and then we went on the fast track past everyone, so basically the first thing when they measured my blood was it was 12.5 times thinner than my normal blood should be. So, and I think when people who have had heart attacks, or they need their blood thinning, they have that Wolfram, and Wolfram is designed to. So when people who have Wolfram, when they cut themselves, they bleed quite a lot, and that thins your blood out to about 2.5. But the venom had thinned it out to 12.5. So it was funny, because in hospital, all these old bruises came out, and one of the most bruises was a bruise that the Brumbie had given me. That was Luca, when I was a little close one day handling him, and he was a little frozen in his eye, and I just went in for a touch and go, and he reached around and he grabbed me on the chest, and I had this big sort of ring right around my nipple on my chest, and that had healed up, but then after the snake bite, I get this new fresh ring around my chest, when all the sort of internally any old bruises all sort of came out, or any bumps that you've had seemed to, and then the next thing was the paralysis. That was a funny one, because I started to talk like I'd almost had a really bad stroke or something. So basically, I was talking like, oh, and people couldn't understand me very well. And it was funny how some people treat you when you start to talk differently too. It was almost like they thought you had something else wrong with you, not just a snake bite. So.
And your muscle breakdown?
Yeah, well, that was the longest one. That was the one that took ages. So it it spiked to about 159,000, and which is kind of like quite like crash victims, sort of, and that was the one that was a bit scary because I thought I was getting better when my paralysis went away and I could eat again, I could talk properly, and the paralysis lucky didn't go any further into my lungs or my any other my major organs or anything. It stayed in my mouth area. But the scary thing was the nurses and the doctors said, "Oh, you sound a lot better now." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't feel very good. I don't know what's going on." But I got weaker and weaker and weaker. And I think by the last week, I couldn't even plug in a PowerPoint. I was that weak, and I think if I stepped down a step, and if I didn't, like if my knees would sort of crumble if I wasn't very careful about walking down steps or anything like that. So, and I got to the stage I thought nearly needed a bit of help in the shower, but that was a bit like no. But yeah, and that was a scary bit because the doctor just said, well, you don't know what's going to happen.
So you were in intensive care for about a week and then in hospital rehabilitating for about a month afterwards. You got home, you were as skinny as a rake. There was absolutely nothing of you. You're still very much recovering. And in fact, I think it took you a further 8 months before you regained most of your body mass and your muscles took a long time to come back. So you were skinny, you were weak from this, and you had the Brumbies still there at home waiting.
So equine influenza had and equine influenza had hit, and Jenny, you had to finish the fencing job while I was in hospital and run it, and equine influenza hit, and it opened up again. It stopped. So they were really keen to get these Brumbies in work, and so my first job after the Brumbies had 2 months off, so a bit more than 2 months, was to get them back into work again. And I was only 2 weeks.
How did you feel? What was going through your mind?
Oh, well, considering the last ride on Luca, he dropped his lolly and, that was the last bucking ride. I knew that I had to finish him.
And he was the big, strong one.
He was the big, strong, nervous one. And I was pretty frightened because, when you just don't have your, you don't have your strength, you don't have, you got nothing. So you're at the mercy of the horse, just like some people at the mercy of the ocean when they're scuba diving. You felt a bit more at the mercy because you'd aged. You were about 70 or 80 years old. That's what it felt like in the space of a month. So yeah, that was quite interesting. But the good thing was every one of them that I'd started after the 2 months off went really well. They came back into work well. There was no niggly bits. It was just kind of just going through and improving on what they'd learnt. So everything they'd learnt. I didn't have to do anything, and I had a young fella that I employed at the time to help me, but I made sure I got on them all first to make sure they're okay before he started to work them. And he's just to sort of put the extra miles on me and just be around when I was working them as well. So, but then I had to get Luca going. So yeah, so the mare I was a bit worried about because she was a bit bronchi outside a bit when she used to canter a bit, but that had all sorted itself out and she was comfortable and going well. And but when I got Luca in, I'm like, okay. So I thought, well, I've you're the one I haven't really started yet. I've only just got on you, and I had 3 days of groundwork with him, and I got on him, and he never put a foot wrong. He went really well. So
he never bugged.
Never bugged. We rode him. We got him going. He didn't do anything. And
what do you put that down to?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe all the prior work that I did to him, trying to build up his trust before I rode him. Obviously, maybe if I got on him that day and got off him and got on him and had a few things, and he wasn't so startled, and I didn't get on him in that moment of haste, in the sense of, the young ego and the other blokes watching you all the time. You think, oh well, I'll get on, and maybe that ride might have went a bit better. I don't know, but who knows? Maybe it could have went pear shaped, and I knew that he was sensitive enough that anything could have happened, but he'd learned something and he got over it and we moved on, and he remembered it because after 3 days of groundwork he was sensitive and nervous. You could still feel that horse in him, but each day he got more confidence, and he ended up the most competitive one out of the lot, as I believe. He ended up always in the middle. So he wasn't winning, he wasn't losing, but he wasn't betting out, and he was always getting in the middle ranks all the time. So he went well in his endurance.
Do you think they knew that you were quite weak? Did you think they looked after you on some level?
Oh, well, I think he knew I wasn't who I was, yeah, and maybe I don't know. I never really thought about it.
And so you were happy once you had finished them and you were riding all of them now. They were able to go off to their new homes. What was it like to say goodbye to them?
Well, I got so used to saying goodbye to horses at that stage. It was sort of just another batch of horses. I guess what I used to think. I think the hardest thing was I even with Luca, I probably could have said maybe he's going to be too tough and chose not to work him because I always had that, people respected my judgment. So they were like, oh, and I've had people before say if that horse is too tough, we can go and get another one or whatever. But the problem is once I start with a horse, I kind of like him, and I liked Luca. He was a soft soul. He just was a very nervous horse, like some people out there that have got a Mustang or a Brumbie from the wild and they were really tough to get a touch on. They were really nervous, really had a lot of self-preservation, but they're actually just gentle horses. And that bite that he gave me, it was my fault in the sense that I was in there just a little long and he came out of a bit of a freeze eye and just had self-preservation and protection, but he was never nasty. Mind you, one day I did get on him and another thing happened like that, and that's why I was really taking him steady and I just couldn't work on the 15 lessons. She'll be right, mate. As I was getting on him one day, I forgot to say this, and he did spin around and sort of double barrel, and I remember his hoof hitting my helmet because I had a helmet on, and his back foot as he spun around and kicked out, it whizzed past and it clipped my helmet just right near my temple. And it was kind of like, it was only an inch out, in the sense of, and that kind of, puts the wind up you when that happens because it was a proper spin around and get off me. And it was, and some people said, oh, he's a nasty, he's got, the old thing in Australia, what people say is, oh, they got dirt in them, that horse. And I never used to say that when I was training horses, or there was a worse saying, but I won't say it live, because I thought, well, we're trying to climb all over them, and they're the ones that, as I say, it's just a self-preservation thing. Now, he never came at me or ever sort of, it was only when I was in his space and he was building up, like his anxiety stacking a bit. And as I say, I used to take horses on tough horses and have a short amount of time to do them. You got used to sort of having horses in sometimes a bit of nervous state while you were doing certain things, and then you did it until they softened a bit. But in that moment of nervousness, when you're in and out, when you're in, you might get yourself in a bit of trouble. If you had a longer process, well, you could do it on a slower period, and you could get in there when they're sort of gooey. But we didn't have that sort of I didn't have that sort of grace. So.
It's a remarkable story, what you've done with those Brumbies and all the other Brumbies that you've trained in your time. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Jenny, and thanks everybody for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like it, share it, or leave us a comment. It all helps in reaching new ears and helping more horses. Learn more of Mark Langley's unique insights and how you can positively affect your horse's training ability and mental welfare. For just the price of a couple of coffees, you can access his online horsemanship training videos. Head to marklangley.com.au. We look forward to helping you.